Marcus Thorne believed a person's worth could be measured by their address. He didn't know that the woman he just insulted owned his. Within 3 weeks, his entire world, a carefully constructed facade of status and superiority, would be systematically dismantled by the very person he had dismissed as nothing more than trailer trash. This is a story about the quiet strength that lies hidden behind unassuming exteriors and the loud fragility of a life built on judging others. It's a reminder that the ground beneath our feet is sometimes owned by the people we look down upon. We're so glad you're here with us for this story. Before we begin, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us of the power of integrity and the satisfying turn of fortune's wheel. The air at Meadowbrook Park was thick with the scent of grilled hot dogs and freshly cut grass. It was a Saturday in early June, one of those perfect, cloudless days that felt like a gift. Children's laughter provided a chaotic, joyful soundtrack, weaving between the gentle hum of conversations and the sizzle of the communal barbecue grills. Elena Vance, her hands smudged with a bit of charcoal, smiled as she adjusted a red and white checkered tablecloth that refused to stay put in the light breeze. She wore simple denim jeans, a plain white t-shirt, and her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. To any casual observer, she was just another resident, another volunteer helping to make the annual community picnic a success. And that was precisely how she liked it. Marcus Thorne was not a casual observer. He was a professional assessor of people, or so he believed. His observations weren't for understanding, but for categorization. He jogged along the pristine asphalt path of the adjacent, far more exclusive, Summit Creek Estates, a path separated from Meadowbrook only by a line of manicured hedges and a significant gap in property values. He slowed to a walk, catching his breath, his expensive athletic wear wicking away sweat that dared not mar his image. He looked over the hedge with an expression of faint distaste, like a biologist examining a lesser species in a poorly maintained enclosure. His eyes scanned the crowd. Faded lawn chairs, mismatched coolers, people laughing a little too loudly, their clothes a collage of department store sales and comfortable wear. It was, in his mind, a tableau of mediocrity. Then his gaze landed on Elena. She was talking to old Mr. Henderson, laughing as he told one of his famously long-winded stories. There was a grace in her posture, an unguarded warmth in her smile that momentarily intrigued him. He watched as she gently guided the elderly man to a seat in the shade and brought him a paper plate loaded with food, an act of simple kindness. But Marcus's mind didn't process it as kindness. It processed it as servitude. He saw a woman who belonged here, a woman whose life was defined by paper plates and communal grills. He mentally cataloged her. Late 30s, pleasant but unremarkable face, dressed in clothes that signaled a complete lack of ambition. She was, he concluded with the swift, unthinking cruelty of the truly arrogant, perfectly at home. His wife Chloe, who had been struggling to keep pace with him, finally caught up. She leaned against the decorative wrought iron fence that marked the boundary of their superior world, her breathing shallow. "Can we slow down, Marcus? I'm not built for marathons." Marcus didn't look at her. His attention was still fixed on the scene across the hedge. "Look at that," he said, his voice a low murmur of condescension. He gestured with a slight tilt of his head towards Meadowbrook, the annual gathering of the great unwashed. Chloe followed his gaze and saw nothing but people enjoying a sunny afternoon. "They seem happy," she offered, a weak defense she knew he would instantly dismantle. "Happiness is the consolation prize of the unambitious," Marcus retorted, a pithy line he'd probably read in some pop philosophy business book. He then pointed more directly at Elena, who was now helping a young girl who had dropped her ice cream cone. "See that woman? The one playing den mother?" Chloe squinted. "The one in the white shirt?" "That's the one," Marcus confirmed. "She's the perfect embodiment of this whole place. No style, No aspirations, just content to be here. Probably lives in that double wide over by the entrance, the one with the sad-looking plastic flamingos. His lip curled. It's a shame, really. She's not unattractive, but you can't wash off the stench of trailer trash. It's in the DNA. The words, sharp and venomous, hung in the warm air. Chloe flinched. She hated when he talked like this. It was a side of him that had grown more pronounced as his career had advanced, as if each promotion stripped away a layer of his humanity, replacing it with a veneer of polished contempt. That's a horrible thing to say, Marcus. It's an observation, Chloe, not a judgment, he said, though it was precisely a judgment. Some people are destined to live in places like that, and some of us are destined for the azure. The azure was their apartment building, the pinnacle of modern luxury living in the city, with its floor-to-ceiling windows, rooftop infinity pool, and concierge service. For Marcus, it wasn't a home, it was a trophy, a daily affirmation of his success and superiority. He turned away from the fence, his brief sociological study complete. Come on, I want to beat my personal best time. He started jogging again, leaving Chloe to cast one last, apologetic glance towards the picnic. Across the hedge, Elena felt a momentary chill, a prickling sensation on the back of her neck, as if a shadow had passed over the sun. She looked up, her eyes scanning the jogging path. She saw the back of a man in expensive athletic gear pulling away, and a woman in matching attire watching him go, her posture slumped in resignation. Elena couldn't hear their words, but she could read the language of their bodies. She had seen that particular dynamic, the arrogant husband and the defeated wife, countless times. It was a small, sad story played out in 1,000 different settings. She sighed, dismissed the fleeting feeling of unease, and turned her attention back to the little girl, who was now smiling with a new, safely in hand ice cream cone. What Elena didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, was that the man's dismissive gaze had been fixed on her. She didn't know that he had weighed, measured, and judged her entire existence in a single, contemptuous glance. And she certainly didn't know that this man, Marcus Thorne, was a tenant in the very building, the Azure, that she and her husband Liam had purchased 6 months ago as the cornerstone of their new real estate portfolio. He lived on the 17th floor in a unit whose rent payment contributed directly to the picnic she was currently hosting for the residents of Meadowbrook Park, another property she and Liam owned. Marcus Thorne believed his home was a castle separating him from the commoners. He had no idea he was merely a guest in the Queen's domain. The Queen who, in his eyes, was just another piece of trailer trash. The irony was a silent, sleeping giant waiting for the right moment to awaken. 2 hours later, as the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the park, Elena sat with her husband on the weathered steps of the small community office. Liam Vance had arrived an hour earlier, dressed as casually as she was, and had immediately been roped into a fiercely competitive game of horseshoes. Now he leaned back, an arm draped around her shoulders, a bottle of water dangling from his hand. "Good day?" he asked, his voice warm and familiar. "A great day," Elena replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. Mrs. Gable's potato salad was, as advertised, legendary, and Mr. Henderson told me the entire plot of a 1950s science fiction movie he's convinced is a documentary. Liam chuckled. "Sounds about right. I love this place." He looked out at the remaining families packing up their belongings, the scene bathed in the golden light of early evening. "There's an honesty here, no pretense." "There isn't," Elena agreed softly. She paused, the memory of the couple on the jogging path returning to her. It was a minor thing, a fleeting moment, but it had left a small, sharp splinter in the otherwise perfect fabric of the day. "I saw a couple over on the Summit Creek path earlier," she began, her tone thoughtful. "They were watching us." Liam followed her gaze to the now empty path. "And?" "I don't know. It was the way he looked, like he was disgusted, The woman with him looked embarrassed. Elena straightened up, turning to face him. It just reminded me of why we left that world, Liam. That constant judgment, the endless measuring of everyone and everything. Before marrying Liam, Elena had been a rising star at a prestigious architectural firm in New York. She had the corner office, the six-figure salary, the accolades. But she also had the burnout, the gnawing emptiness that came from designing glass and steel monuments for corporations and billionaires who cared more about status than soul. Liam, a financial analyst who had quietly built a fortune through shrewd, ethical investments, had seen the light dimming in her eyes. It was his idea to cash out, to leave that world behind and build something of their own, something tangible and real. Their retirement, as their former colleagues called it, was a quiet acquisition of a diverse property portfolio under a holding company, Vance Sterling Properties. They bought commercial buildings, a few luxury apartment complexes like the Azure, and, on a whim that felt more like a calling, Meadowbrook Park. Elena had fallen in love with its unpretentious charm and the sense of community that lingered there like the scent of pine. While Liam handled the high-level finances and asset management, Elena had taken on the role of chief strategist and designer, overseeing renovations and community initiatives. For her, redesigning the community center at Meadowbrook was infinitely more satisfying than designing another sterile skyscraper. She found joy in the hands-on work, in talking to residents and understanding their needs. She didn't need anyone to know she was the owner. She just wanted to make it a better place to live. "Well," Liam said, squeezing her shoulder gently, "their judgment doesn't matter. They can have their sterile jogging paths and their silent, miserable dinners. I'd rather be here, losing at horseshoes to a retired postal worker." Elena smiled, the tension leaving her. He was right. That was the choice they had made. She pulled a small, leather-bound journal and a pencil from her tote bag. It was a simple, worn object, its pages filled with intricate sketches and scribbled notes. It was her constant companion, the place where her architectural mind still played and dreamed. She flipped to a clean page and began to sketch, the lines flowing from her pencil with an easy, practiced grace. It was an idea for a new playground, with structures that mimicked the surrounding trees and a small amphitheater for community gatherings. "What's that?" Liam asked, peering over her shoulder. "A thought," she murmured, her focus intense. "For the kids. Something that feels like it grew right out of the ground." As she drew, she was no longer the woman in the simple t-shirt who had been dismissed from across a hedge. She was Elena Vance, the architect, the creator, the visionary. The pencil in her hand was an extension of a mind that could shape steel, glass, and landscapes. The journal was her symbolic scepter, a quiet testament to a power and talent the man on the jogging path could never comprehend. He had judged the cover and in his arrogance had not only failed to read the book, but was entirely unaware that he was merely a minor character within its pages. The story was hers to write, and she was a patient author. She would let the plot unfold naturally. For now, there was a playground to design. The retribution could wait. It would be all the more satisfying for the delay. 3 weeks later, Elena was in the lobby of the Azure. The cool, quiet opulence of the space was a world away from Meadowbrook's sun-drenched fields. The air smelled faintly of green tea and lilies, a custom scent diffused through the ventilation system. A cascading water feature trickled down a wall of polished black marble, the sound a hushed murmur against the silent efficiency of the building. Elena was not there as a resident, but as an owner, though her attire once again belied her status. Dressed in functional, dark trousers and a simple blue button-down shirt, she was deep in conversation with the building's head of maintenance, a kind, hard-working man named George. They were standing over a set of architectural plans spread across a low table in a corner of the vast lobby. Elena was pointing to a section of the wall near the mailroom. "So the dampness is definitely coming from this pipe chase here," she said, her finger tracing a blue line on the schematic. It's a slow leak, but it's compromising the drywall. I don't want to just patch it, George. I want to replace the entire section of copper piping. Let's get ahead of the problem." George nodded, impressed. Most owners would say to just patch it and paint over it. Cheaper. Cheaper now, a catastrophe later, Elena countered with a smile. Let's do it right. I've already sourced the materials from a supplier I trust. They can be here by Thursday. Can your team handle the installation? Absolutely, Mrs. Vance. We'll get it done, he said, the name Mrs. Vance spoken with a quiet, professional respect. It was at that exact moment that the sleek elevator doors whispered open, and Marcus Thorne strode out. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, a leather briefcase in one hand, his phone pressed to his ear with the other. He was barking orders at some subordinate, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous lobby. "No, I don't care what their projection is. My projection is the only one that matters. Make it happen." He ended the call with a curt tap of his finger and slipped the phone into his pocket. As he turned toward the concierge desk, his eyes fell upon Elena and George. A flicker of recognition, followed by a wave of smug amusement, crossed his face. He saw the same woman from the park picnic, now in what he assumed was a maintenance uniform, looking at blueprints. The narrative his mind had constructed was, to him, being confirmed in real time. He altered his course, striding over to them with the unearned confidence of a king surveying his subjects. He stopped a few feet away, a condescending smile playing on his lips. He ignored George completely, his focus entirely on Elena. "Well, well," he began, his tone dripping with false bonhomie. "Look at you, moving on up in the world." Elena slowly looked up from the plans, her expression calm, her eyes unreadable. She recognized him instantly as the jogger from the park. The pieces clicked into place. This man, this arrogant, judgmental man, was one of her tenants. The universe, it seemed, had a flair for the dramatic. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice even and quiet. "The park picnic, right?" Marcus pressed on, oblivious to the warning signs in her stillness. "Now you're here. Good for you. It's a big step up from, well, you know." He gestured vaguely, as if the words trailer park were too distasteful to utter in this pristine environment. "This is a great building, lots of opportunity for hardworking people." George, standing beside Elena, stiffened. He knew exactly who Elena was. He opened his mouth to intervene, to correct this arrogant fool, but Elena gave the slightest, almost imperceptible shake of her head. It was a clear, silent command. "Stand down. Let him continue." Marcus took her silence as validation. "Keep at it," he said, patting her shoulder in a gesture of paternalistic encouragement that made her skin crawl. "Show this kind of initiative and who knows, maybe one day you'll be able to afford a place like this yourself." He gave her one last patronizing smile, then turned and walked toward the exit, his polished shoes clicking on the marble floor. The insult was so layered, so dense with condescension, that it was almost a work of art. He hadn't just insulted her, he had insulted her intelligence, her work, her very existence, all while positioning himself as a benevolent source of encouragement. He was offering a pat on the head to the woman who signed his lease agreement. As the glass doors slid shut behind him, a heavy silence settled over the corner of the lobby. George looked at Elena, his face a mixture of fury and disbelief. "Mrs. Vance, I am so sorry. That man, that's Mr. Thorne from 17B. I should have said something. I can go to the building manager. We can file a complaint." Elena took a slow, deep breath, her gaze fixed on the doors through which Marcus had just departed. The anger was there, a cold, hard knot in her stomach. But it was overshadowed by a profound sense of clarity. This was no longer a random, fleeting encounter. This was a pattern. This was who this man was, in public and in private. He was a bully who built himself up by tearing others down. "No, George," she said, her voice regaining its steady composure. Do not say a word to anyone. This is not a matter for the building manager. She looked back at the blueprints, her mind already working, connecting dots he couldn't see. She tapped the schematic for the 17th floor, right over the unit labeled 17B. Mr. Thorne is creating a problem for himself, she said, more to herself than to George. And I've always believed in letting people solve their own problems. She folded the blueprints with precise, deliberate movements. The anger was being channeled, transformed from a hot, useless emotion into a cold, calculated resolve. Her first instinct had been to let it go, to rise above it. But the second encounter changed the equation. This wasn't just about her. It was about the casual cruelty he wielded, the assumption that a person's worth was tied to their clothing or their perceived station. It was a mindset that she found not just offensive, but dangerous. In her journal that evening, below the new sketch of the playground, she made a simple note. It contained a date, a location, and a name. July 3rd, Azure Lobby, Marcus Thorne. Below it, she added the note from 3 weeks prior. June 12th, Meadowbrook Picnic. It was becoming a list of grievances. Not for revenge, she told herself, but for accountability. Justice, like architecture, required a solid foundation and a clear plan. Marcus Thorne was laying the foundation himself. Elena was simply drawing up the blueprints for the inevitable structure that would be built upon it. She was a patient architect, and she knew that the most impressive structures sometimes took the longest to build. And the most satisfying demolitions were the ones where the building collapsed under the weight of its own flawed design. The next month was a period of deceptive calm, a quiet expanse of time where the currents of consequence ran deep beneath a placid surface. For Marcus Thorne, life had never been better. He was at the apex of his professional game. The regional branch of his financial firm, Sterling Cross Investments, was outperforming all national targets, largely due to a series of aggressive, if risky, strategies he had personally spearheaded. He was the golden boy, and he knew it. His boss, the firm's co-founder and CEO, Jonathan Sterling, a man of old money and even older principles, was notoriously hard to impress, but even he had begun to acknowledge Marcus's success. The centerpiece of Marcus's ambition was the Phoenix Project, a massive expansion plan that would see his branch absorb 2 smaller competitors, effectively doubling its size and market share. It was his magnum opus, the project that would catapult him from a successful regional manager to a major player on the national stage. All it required was 2 things: the renewal and expansion of their current office lease in the prestigious downtown commercial tower, a building known as the Citadel, and securing a substantial 9-figure expansion loan from a private equity firm. Marcus was supremely confident on both fronts. The lease renewal he considered a mere formality. He'd already had a preliminary, condescending chat with the building's property manager, a man he mentally dismissed as a glorified clerk. The loan, he was assured, was practically a done deal. Sterling Cross had a long-standing relationship with the equity firm Northgate Capital. All that remained was the final presentation, a formality to get the last signatures on the paperwork. He spent his days in a state of supreme self-satisfaction, his arrogance buffed to a high shine by his recent successes. His wife Chloe seemed to recede further into the background, her silent disapproval a minor, irrelevant annoyance. He was a man on the verge of greatness, and he had no time for naysayers. Meanwhile, in the quiet, sunlit office of Vance Sterling Properties, Elena and Liam were conducting their quarterly portfolio review. The name was a small, private tribute, Vance for their family name, and Sterling for the street where Elena's beloved grandmother had lived. It had no connection to Jonathan Sterling or his investment firm, a coincidence that would soon prove to be profoundly significant. Their office was not a high-rise shrine to commerce. It was a beautifully restored brick and beam space in a historic part of the city, filled with natural light, thriving plants, and Elena's architectural models. It was a space that valued creativity and calm over corporate intimidation. Liam sat at the large oak table, a tablet in his hand displaying spreadsheets and financial projections. The Azure is performing 17% above projection, he said, swiping through the data. The renovations to the lower floors have been a huge success. Occupancy is at 99%. Good, Elena said, looking up from a document she was reviewing. And Meadowbrook? Profitable, but more importantly, the community fund is healthy. Your new playground is fully funded, Liam said with a smile. The Residents Association sent over a thank you card big enough to be a placemat. Elena's heart warmed at that. That was the work that mattered. She then turned her attention to the document in her hands. It was the tenant roster and lease schedule for the Citadel, their largest commercial holding. It was a gleaming 40-story tower that housed some of the city's most powerful corporations. Sterling Cross Investments, she read aloud, her fingers stopping on the name. Their lease for the entire 34th floor is up for renewal next month. Liam nodded. Correct. They've also submitted a proposal to lease the 35th floor. They're planning a major expansion. It would be our largest single tenancy, very lucrative. Elena's expression remained neutral, but her mind was whirring. Sterling Cross. The name was common enough, but the coincidence was nagging at her. She picked up her own tablet and did a quick search for the firm's executive team. A corporate headshot appeared on the screen. It was him, Marcus Thorne, listed as Regional Vice President, the man from the park, the man from the lobby, the man who lived in her building and was now proposing to become her single largest commercial tenant. The sleeping giant of irony stirred, stretched, and began to open one eye. She looked at Liam, her face a mask of calm. Liam, who is the private equity firm they're working with for their expansion loan? Liam, deep in his own spreadsheets, answered without looking up. Northgate Capital. It's one of the portfolios I still actively manage. Their board has given me full discretionary power over the Sterling Cross deal. Why do you ask? Elena was silent for a long moment. The pieces of the puzzle were no longer just on the board. They were assembling themselves into a picture of breathtaking clarity. She and Liam owned the building where Marcus lived. They owned the building where he worked. And Liam held the key to the 9-figure loan that was the foundation of his entire professional ambition. Marcus Thorne wasn't just a guest in her home. He was a guest in her entire kingdom, and he had spent his time there insulting the queen. No reason, Elena said softly, closing her tablet. Just connecting the dots. Liam finally looked up, catching the strange, intense light in her eyes. What is it, Elle? What's that look? It's a look of architectural appreciation, she said, a slow, enigmatic smile touching her lips. Sometimes you see a structure that is so perfectly, so fatally flawed in its design that you don't need a wrecking ball to bring it down. You just need to wait for the right gust of wind. She stood up and walked over to the window, looking out over the city. She could just see the top of the Citadel in the distance. Marcus Thorne thought he was building an empire. He had no idea he was building it on a foundation of sand, on a property owned by the woman he despised, with money controlled by her husband. The quiet before the storm was officially over. A front was moving in, and Elena Vance was in absolute control of the weather. The setting for the third and final humiliation was the annual St. Jude Children's Hospital Gala, the glittering apex of the city's philanthropic social calendar. It was an evening of performative charity where the city's elite gathered to write large checks and have their pictures taken doing so. The ballroom of the Grand Excelsior Hotel was a symphony of crystal, silver, and forced smiles. Men in bespoke tuxedos and women in shimmering gowns moved through the space, their laughter tinkling like wind chimes, their conversations a carefully curated blend of business and gossip. Marcus and Chloe Thorne were in their element, or rather, Marcus was. He navigated the crowded room with the predatory grace of a shark, shaking hands, clapping backs, and dispensing compliments that were thinly veiled transactions. Chloe trailed in his wake, a beautiful, silent accessory in a sapphire dress that felt like a costume. Her smile was brittle, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. Marcus's primary target for the evening was his boss, Jonathan Sterling, who was holding court near the silent auction tables. Sterling was a man in his late 60s, with a shock of white hair and eyes that had seen everything and were impressed by nothing. He tolerated Marcus's ambition because it was profitable, but he harbored a deep, unspoken skepticism about the younger man's character. "Jonathan," Marcus boomed, approaching with a wide, confident grin. "Wonderful event as always. The hospital does such incredible work." Sterling turned, his expression unreadable. "Marcus, Chloe, you're looking well." His gaze lingered on Chloe for a moment, with something that looked like sympathy before turning back to Marcus. "I trust your final presentation for the Northgate loan is prepared? The board meeting is in 2 weeks." "Locked and loaded, Jonathan. It's a slam dunk," Marcus said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "The lease renewal at the Citadel is also just a formality. We'll be breaking ground on the new floor by the end of the quarter." It was then that Marcus's eyes scanned the room and suddenly locked on a familiar figure. Near the hors d'oeuvres table, talking to one of the event organizers, was Elena Vance. She was not in a gown. She was dressed in the standard, professional black-on-black uniform of the event staff. She and Liam were major, albeit anonymous donors to the hospital. Elena had also volunteered her firm's services to design the new pediatric wing, a project she was deeply passionate about. She was here tonight to meet with the hospital's board chair to go over the final schematics, a meeting she'd arranged to coincide with the gala for convenience. She was holding a large roll of blueprints. To Marcus, however, the context was wildly, laughably different. His brain, conditioned by his prejudices, saw only one possible reality. The trailer trash woman had gotten another job. First the park, then maintenance, and now catering. He saw her simple black clothes and the blueprints in her hand, and his mind twisted them into the uniform of a server and a misplaced work order. It was too perfect, too validating. A surge of triumphant cruelty washed over him. He had been right about her all along. He leaned in conspiratorially toward Jonathan Sterling, a smirk spreading across his face. He lowered his voice, but not so low that it couldn't be overheard. "You know, Jonathan," he began, "it's one thing to support a cause like this. It's another thing entirely when the help starts eating the canapes." He subtly gestured with his chin towards Elena. "See that woman over there? The one with the paperwork? I've seen her around. She lives in that trailer park out by Summit Creek, works odd jobs. It's a testament to her grit, I suppose, that she's made it into this room at all. Still, you'd think they'd have them eat in the kitchen." The insult was the most vicious yet, delivered on a public stage to the man who held his career in his hands. It was a calculated risk, an attempt to create a moment of shared, elitist amusement between him and his boss. Jonathan Sterling's eyes followed Marcus's gesture and settled on Elena. He didn't smile. His expression, in fact, grew colder. He knew exactly who Elena Vance was. He had served on 2 charity boards with her and had once tried to hire her as the lead architect for his firm's new headquarters, an offer she had politely declined. He knew of her firm, her talent, and her quiet, immense wealth. He knew she was the visionary behind the new pediatric wing they were ostensibly here to fund. He looked from Elena, who was now unfurling the blueprints to show the board chair, back to the smirking, oblivious face of his regional vice president. For the first time, Sterling's skepticism about Marcus's character solidified into concrete certainty. The man was not just arrogant, he was a fool, a dangerous, blind fool. Across the room, Elena heard the tail end of the comment. The acoustics of the grand ballroom were unforgiving, and Marcus's stage whisper carried, "Have them eat in the kitchen." She didn't need to see who said it. She knew that voice. She knew that particular brand of venom. She slowly turned her head and her eyes met Marcus's from across the expanse of polished floor. He held her gaze for a moment, his smirk unwavering, before turning back to his boss, confident that he had made his point. In that moment, something inside Elena shifted. The patient observer, the architect of a slow unfolding justice, disappeared. The list of grievances in her mind was no longer a tool for accountability. It was a declaration of war. She had tolerated his private snobbery. She had endured his personal condescension. But this public, cruel, dehumanizing comment at an event for sick children, an event celebrating work she was passionately contributing to, this was the final, unforgivable transgression. Liam, who had been getting them drinks, returned to her side. He saw the look on her face and immediately knew something was wrong. "Elle, what is it? What happened?" Elena didn't answer immediately. She simply watched Marcus Thorne laugh with his boss, a man utterly unaware that he had just detonated his own career with a single, carelessly thrown remark. She rolled up the blueprints, her movements sharp and precise. "The meeting with the hospital board is done," she said, her voice low and dangerously calm. "I think it's time we went home." Liam looked from her rigid posture to the group across the room. He saw Marcus Thorne. He saw Jonathan Sterling's stony expression, and he understood. What did he do? Elena finally turned to him, and the look in her eyes made his blood run cold. It was the look of a storm front, of immense pressure about to be unleashed. "He just laid the capstone on his own tomb," she said, "and I'm going to make sure the epitaph is written in his own words." The drive home from the gala was a study in tense silence. The city lights blurred past the windows of the car, a glittering, indifferent audience to the drama unfolding within. Liam drove, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. He kept glancing at Elena, who sat perfectly still in the passenger seat, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. The opulent ballroom, the music, the chatter, it all felt a million miles away. All that remained was the cold, hard residue of Marcus Thorne's final insult. "I can call our legal team in the morning," Liam said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "We can start eviction proceedings at the Azure, violation of community standards, harassment. Then I'll call the board of Northgate. The loan is dead. We can sink his entire expansion project by lunchtime tomorrow." It was a swift, brutal, and entirely justified response. It was a wrecking ball aimed directly at the foundations of Marcus's world. But Elena, to his surprise, slowly shook her head. "No," she said, her voice quiet but firm. The word hung in the air, seemingly at odds with the glacial anger in her eyes. "No?" Liam was incredulous. "Elena, what he said tonight, what he's been doing, there's a limit. He crossed it. He needs to be dealt with, decisively." "I agree," she said, finally turning to look at him. "He needs to be dealt with, but not like that. Not with a phone call from a lawyer or a sudden, unexplained loan denial. That's too easy. It's too impersonal." She paused, gathering her thoughts, her architect's mind seeing not just the target, but the entire landscape. "He's spent weeks building a narrative about me. In his mind, I'm a caricature, a nameless, faceless member of a lower class he despises. If we just pull the plug from a distance, he'll never understand why. He'll blame the economy or corporate politics or bad luck. He'll see himself as a victim. He will never be forced to confront the true cause of his downfall, his own character." Liam listened, the anger in his own chest beginning to yield to the cold logic of her words. He knew that look on her face. It was the same look she got when she was solving a complex structural problem, seeing the hidden stresses and support points that no one else could. "He built this trap for himself, Liam," she continued, her voice gaining a steely edge. "He laid the foundation with his comments at the park. He built the walls with his condescension in the lobby. And tonight, he put the roof on with his performance for his boss. It's a perfectly constructed prison of his own arrogance. All we have to do is let him walk into it, and then, quietly, lock the door behind him. What are you proposing? Liam asked, his curiosity now piqued. A meeting, Elena said simply. A face-to-face meeting. He's expecting a lease negotiation for the Citadel. He's expecting to talk to a property manager. He is not expecting to talk to us. A slow smile spread across Liam's face as he grasped the elegant, poetic justice of her plan. It wasn't just about punishment, it was about enlightenment. A forced, brutal, and public enlightenment. And the Northgate loan? He asked. That will be part of the same meeting, Elena replied. We will address all of his business in one place at one time. His apartment, his office, and his career. A trinity of consequences. She looked out the window again. He needs to see me, not the caricature he's invented, but me. He needs to sit across a table from the trailer trash and understand that she holds his entire world in her hands. And he needs to understand that he handed her the power himself, with every single condescending word. The plan was audacious. It was theatrical. It was also, Liam realized, profoundly just. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about forcing a man to look into a mirror he had spent his entire life avoiding. When they arrived home at their penthouse apartment, a space Elena had designed herself, filled with warmth, books, and art, a stark contrast to the sterile status symbol of Marcus's unit 12 floors below, Elena went straight to her office. She pulled out the leather-bound journal. She turned to the page with her list of grievances. June 12th, Meadowbrook Picnic, Trailer Trash. July 3rd, Azure Lobby, moving on up in the world. She picked up her pencil, the graphite tip sharp and precise. She added a third and final entry. August 5th, St. Jude's Gala, have them eat in the kitchen. She looked at the 3 lines. They were simple statements of fact, but together they formed a narrative, a damning indictment written by the accused himself. They were the cornerstones of the case she would present. The next morning, Liam's assistant sent an email to Marcus Thorne. It was brief and professional. Subject: lease renewal and expansion proposal. The Citadel, 34th and 35th floors. Dear Mr. Thorne, we are in receipt of your proposal for the renewal and expansion of your lease at the Citadel. Before we proceed, the owners of the property would like to have a meeting to discuss the terms of your tenancy and your firm's future within the building. The meeting has been scheduled for August 19th at 10 a.m. in the main conference room of Vance Sterling Properties. The principals, Mr. Vance and Ms. Vance, will be in attendance. Please confirm your availability. Marcus read the email with a triumphant smirk. The owners want a meeting. Of course they did. They knew he had them over a barrel. A tenant of that size? They wouldn't risk losing him. They were probably going to roll out the red carpet. Mr. and Mrs. Vance. He didn't recognize the names, but he pictured some stuffy, old money couple who had inherited the building. He would have them eating out of his hand. He typed a curt reply, "Confirmed." He then forwarded the email to his boss, Jonathan Sterling, with a single line of commentary. They're rolling out the red carpet, time to play hardball. He had no idea he was confirming his attendance at his own execution. He thought he was walking into a negotiation. He was actually walking into the mirror, and the reflection was going to be brutal. The 2 weeks leading up to the meeting were, for Marcus Thorne, a period of supreme, unassailable confidence. He strode through the halls of Stirling Cross with an extra swagger, his voice a little louder in meetings, his dismissals of his subordinates a little quicker. He was a man on the cusp of his coronation. He spent hours refining his presentation for the Northgate loan, not to make it better, but to admire his own brilliance. He practiced his hardball negotiation tactics for the Citadel lease in the mirror, adopting what he believed was an intimidating posture. "This is the big league, Chloe," he announced one evening, straightening his tie in the reflection of their apartment's floor-to-ceiling windows. The city glittered below them like a carpet of jewels he was about to claim. "This meeting with the Vances, it's a formality, but it's about establishing dominance. You don't ask for what you want, you take it. Chloe, sitting on the edge of their ridiculously oversized sofa, said nothing. She just watched his reflection in the glass, a man so in love with his own image that he couldn't see the cracks forming all around it. The silence in their apartment had grown cavernous, a vast, empty space between two people who no longer spoke the same language. Her passivity, once born of fear, was beginning to curdle into a quiet contempt. On the morning of August 19th, Marcus dressed with the care of a general preparing for a decisive battle. He chose his most expensive suit, a charcoal gray brioni, a power blue tie, and shoes polished to a mirror shine. He looked at himself in the mirror, gave a final, confident nod, and left for the meeting, leaving Chloe in a home that had started to feel like an exquisitely furnished cage. The offices of Vance Sterling Properties were not what he expected. He was used to the cold, imposing grandeur of corporate towers like the Citadel. This place was different. The restored brick, the warm wood, the abundance of natural light. It felt more like an artist's loft than a corporate headquarters. It was tasteful, understated, and to his sensibilities, unimpressive. It didn't scream power, it whispered comfort, a language he didn't value. He was greeted by a young, polite assistant who led him down a long hallway toward the main conference room. The walls were lined not with corporate awards, but with stunning architectural photography and framed original blueprints. It was all a bit too artisanal for his taste. The assistant opened two large, heavy oak doors. "Mr. Thorne," she announced. Marcus strode into the room, his hand outstretched, a practiced, charming smile already fixed on his face. "A pleasure to finally meet you," he began, his voice booming in the quiet space. And then he stopped. The room was vast, dominated by a single, massive table made from a slab of polished black walnut. At the far end of the table, silhouetted against a floor-to-ceiling window that framed a panoramic view of the city, sat two people, a man and a woman. The man was handsome, with a calm, steady gaze. Marcus didn't recognize him. But the woman he knew, she was not wearing a catering uniform or a maintenance jumpsuit. She was dressed in an impeccably tailored navy blue dress that spoke of quiet, expensive elegance. Her hair, once pulled back in a practical ponytail, was styled in a chic, professional cut. Her face was the same, but the context was shattering. The pleasant but unremarkable woman from the park, the woman he had patronized in the lobby, the woman he had dismissed as the help at the gala, was sitting at the head of the table, in the seat of ultimate power. It was Elena Vance. His smile faltered, his outstretched hand dropping to his side. His mind, usually so quick to categorize and dismiss, sputtered to a halt. It was like seeing his cleaning lady on the throne of England. It didn't compute. The circuits of his worldview were shorting out, smoke pouring from the overloaded system of his prejudices. "Mr. Thorne," Elena said, her voice the same calm, quiet tone he remembered, but now it was imbued with an authority that chilled him to the bone. "Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." She gestured to the single chair placed on the opposite side of the vast table, a deliberate isolation. Marcus moved toward the chair as if in a trance. His legs felt heavy, disconnected from his body. He sat down, his expensive suit suddenly feeling like a cheap costume. He looked from Elena to the man beside her, who was watching him with an expression of cool, detached appraisal. I don't understand," Marcus stammered, the first crack in his carefully constructed facade. "You're from the park." "I am," Elena confirmed without a hint of emotion. "I am also Ms. Vance, one of the owners of this company, and this is my husband and partner, Liam Vance." Liam gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. He said nothing. His silence was more intimidating than any threat. Marcus's mind raced, trying to reassemble the shattered pieces of his reality. The owners, Mr. and Mrs. Vance, Vance Sterling Properties. It was them. They owned the Azure. They owned the Citadel. He looked at Elena, truly looked at her for the first time, and saw not the trailer trash of his imagination, but a woman of immense, quiet power and intelligence. And he had insulted her. Repeatedly, viciously. But the nightmare was just beginning. As his eyes darted around the room, desperate for some anchor in this new, terrifying reality, they landed on a third person sitting quietly in a chair against the wall, almost hidden in the shadows. It was his boss, Jonathan Sterling. Sterling looked at Marcus, his face a mask of profound disappointment and icy fury. He had been there the whole time, a silent witness. Marcus felt a wave of nausea wash over him. This wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't a meeting. It was in tribunal, and he was the one on trial. "Now that we're all here," Elena said, her voice cutting through the thick, suffocating silence, "we can begin." She slid a single, thin file folder across the polished surface of the table. It stopped directly in front of him. "I believe we have a few things to discuss, Mr. Thorne. Your past, your present, and your future." The revelation hung in the air, a devastating, silent explosion that had vaporized Marcus Thorne's world. His confidence, his arrogance, his entire sense of self, all had been incinerated in the space of 30 seconds. He sat frozen in the solitary chair, a specimen under a microscope, the hum of the building's climate control, the only sound in the cavernous room. His gaze flickered between Elena's implacable face, Liam's cold stare, and Jonathan Sterling's simmering rage. There was no escape. The doors, both literal and metaphorical, were locked. Elena let the silence stretch, allowing the full weight of the situation to settle upon him. She watched as the color drained from his face, as a fine sheen of sweat broke out on his brow. She was not gloating. Her expression was one of solemn, almost clinical detachment. This was not an act of passion. It was a necessary, calculated procedure. Finally she spoke, her voice calm and measured, each word landing with the force of a hammer blow. "Before we discuss the business of your lease and your company's expansion, Mr. Thorne, I feel it's important to establish a clear and honest foundation for our relationship, something we have not had up to this point." She folded her hands on the table, her gaze unwavering. "We've met 3 times before today, though I suspect you only truly remember me from 1 or 2 of those occasions." Marcus swallowed hard, his mouth dry as dust. I think there's been a misunderstanding." "There has been no misunderstanding," Elena cut him off, her voice still quiet but now sharpened with a blade of steel. "There has only been your understanding, which has been, to put it mildly, inaccurate. Let's correct that now. I find it's always best to be specific." She began what would become his litany of shame, the list of grievances she had compiled in her journal. "On Saturday, June 12th, she began, at the annual community picnic for the residents of Meadowbrook Park, a property I own and a community I cherish, you were on the adjacent jogging path. You pointed me out to your wife. Although I couldn't hear your exact words at the time, I was later informed by a guest of yours who was visiting the park that you referred to me, and by extension all the residents, as trailer trash." Marcus flinched as if he'd been physically struck. He risked a glance at Jonathan Sterling, whose expression had hardened into granite. Elena continued relentless. "On July 3rd in the lobby of the Azure, the building where you reside as my tenant, I was consulting with my head of maintenance on a necessary structural repair. You approached me. You patronized me. You advised me that if I kept working hard at my menial jobs, I might one day be able to afford a place like this. You even patted me on the shoulder. Do you remember that, Mr. Thorne?" He remembered. He remembered it with a clarity that now made his stomach churn. The memory, once a source of smug satisfaction, was now a monument to his own spectacular foolishness. He could only nod, a pathetic, jerky movement of his head. "And then," Elena said, her voice dropping slightly, becoming even more intense. "There was the St. Jude's Gala 2 weeks ago, an event to raise funds for critically ill children. A new pediatric wing that my firm designed pro bono. You were there, attempting to impress your employer, Mr. Sterling." She gestured briefly towards the man in the corner. "You saw me speaking with the hospital's chairman about the final blueprints. You assumed I was a member of the catering staff, and you remarked to Mr. Sterling that it was a shame the help was allowed to eat the canapes and that we should be made to eat in the kitchen." She paused, letting the last, most vicious insult hang in the air. "Did I miss anything, Mr. Thorne? Is there any part of that record you would like to contest?" Marcus Thorne, the master of the boardroom, the king of the power play, was utterly broken. The words wouldn't come. His throat was a knot of shame and terror. He looked at this woman, this powerful, dignified, and deeply wronged woman, and for the first time he saw himself through her eyes. He saw a petty, cruel, insecure man, a bully who needed to diminish others to feel large. The reflection was hideous. "No," he whispered, the sound barely audible. It's accurate." "Good," Elena said, her tone all business now. "Clarity, that's the foundation we needed." She pushed the thin file folder closer to him. "Now let's talk about your lease at the Citadel." With trembling hands, Marcus opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a notice of non-renewal for the 34th floor and a formal rejection of his proposal to lease the 35th. The reason stated was concise and brutal. A failure to meet the character and community standards required of tenants of Vance Sterling Properties. His head swam. This was a disaster. The Phoenix project was dead before it even began. Without the office space, there could be no expansion. His career-defining project had just been executed with a single sheet of paper. "But you can't," he stammered, desperation clawing its way up his throat. "We're your biggest tenant. It's bad business." It was Liam who spoke for the first time, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "We have a waiting list of companies, good companies run by decent people, who would love to occupy that space, Mr. Thorne. Losing your tenancy is not bad business. Frankly, it's the most satisfying business decision I've made all year. We don't rent to bullies." The finality in Liam's voice was absolute, but the execution was not yet complete. Elena gestured again. "And that brings us to the final item on our agenda, the Phoenix project. Your expansion requires a significant loan, a loan from Northgate Capital." Marcus looked up, a wild, desperate hope flickering in his eyes. The loan. If he could still get the loan, maybe he could salvage this. He could find another building. Maybe he could spin this. Liam leaned forward slightly. "As I believe you know, Northgate Capital has a long-standing relationship with your firm. What you don't know, however, is that for the last 5 years, I have been the senior partner personally overseeing the portfolio that includes Sterling Cross. The board has granted me full discretionary authority over this loan." The last flicker of hope in Marcus's eyes died, extinguished forever. The room started to spin. The man whose wife he had insulted held the keys to his office. The man himself held the keys to his career. It was a perfectly designed, inescapable trap. "The loan is denied," Liam stated, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Effective immediately. The official reason we will give the board is a lack of confidence in the regional management's strategic judgment and personal character, posing an unacceptable risk to our investors." He paused. "I will be speaking to them this afternoon. I will be very, very specific." It was over. Everything. His project, his reputation, his future. All of it gone. Destroyed in a quiet, sunlit conference room by the very people he had deemed beneath his notice. Finally, Jonathan Sterling rose from his chair in the corner. He walked slowly, deliberately, until he was standing behind Marcus's chair. He looked down at the top of his subordinate's head with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. "Marcus," Sterling said, his voice dangerously soft, "you are an embarrassment. You are an embarrassment to me, and you are an embarrassment to the name of my company. You have single-handedly destroyed our most important expansion opportunity and jeopardized our relationship with our primary lender, not through a bad business decision, but through a staggering failure of character. You are arrogant, you are cruel, and worst of all, you are a fool." Sterling looked over at Elena and Liam. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance, I am profoundly sorry for my employees' behavior. I assure you it does not represent the values of my firm." Elena simply nodded. "Your firm did nothing wrong, Mr. Sterling. The problem, as you've noted, is with your regional management." Sterling turned his gaze back to Marcus. "Clean out your desk. You have 1 hour. An escort will meet you at your office. Your employment with Sterling Cross is terminated." The words were a final volley, a public execution. Marcus slumped in his chair, a hollowed-out shell of the man who had walked in an hour before. He had built his world on a foundation of judgment, and now he had been judged. And he had been found wanting. The architect had shown him the flaws in his design, and the entire structure had come crashing down. The immediate aftermath was a blur of humiliation for Marcus. As promised, 2 security guards met him at the 34th floor of the Citadel. They stood silently, arms crossed, as he packed the contents of his office. The framed photos, the stupid motivational posters, the trophies of his ambition, into a single, pathetic cardboard box. His colleagues, who had feared and envied him in equal measure, now watched from their cubicles with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. The king had been deposed, and his exit was a spectacle. The walk of shame through the office, box in hand, was the longest, most agonizing journey of his life. He called Chloe from the sterile, anonymous lobby, his voice cracking. "I've been fired," he said, the words tasting like ash. "The Phoenix Project is dead. We're ruined." He tried to explain what had happened, but the story sounded insane even to his own ears. "The woman from the park, the one I told you about, she and her husband, they own everything. They own the Azure. They own the Citadel. Her husband runs Northgate." It was all a setup. On the other end of the line, Chloe was silent for a long moment. Marcus expected tears, accusations, panic. Instead, her voice, when it came, was eerily calm. "It wasn't a setup, Marcus," she said, a strange new strength in her tone. "It was a consequence. You built that. You did it all by yourself." "What are you talking about?" he pleaded. "They destroyed me." "No," Chloe said, and he could hear the finality in her voice, the sound of a door closing forever. "They just held up a mirror. I've been trying to get you to look into it for years. I'm sorry it took this for you to finally see the reflection." She took a deep breath. "I'm packing my things. I'll be gone by the time you get home. A lawyer will be in touch." The line went dead. He stood on the street corner, a cardboard box of his failed life at his feet, the magnificent glass tower of the Citadel looming over him like a tombstone. He had lost his job, his career, his reputation, and his wife, all in the space of a few hours. He had flown too close to the sun, and his wings, which he thought were made of gold, had turned out to be nothing but wax and feathers. Back in the conference room at Vance Sterling Properties, Jonathan Sterling was profusely apologetic. "Again, I am mortified," he said to Elena and Liam. "I should have seen the rot in him sooner. Is there anything I can do to make amends?" Elena looked at the old man, a titan of industry humbled by his subordinate's folly. "There is one thing," she said. "We believe in second chances, Mr. Sterling, but we also believe they must be earned. Your company can stay in the Citadel, and we will even consider a future expansion proposal." A wave of relief washed over Sterling's face. Thank you. Anything. On one condition," Liam added, his tone firm. Vance Sterling Properties will be drafting a new community and character clause to be included in all our major commercial leases. It will require our tenants to implement and enforce a zero-tolerance policy for harassment and bullying, not just within their own ranks, but in all their dealings with the wider community. Your firm will be the first to sign it. Sterling didn't hesitate. Done, he said. It will be a welcome addition. After he left, Elena and Liam stood by the window, looking out at the city. The storm had passed. The air was clear. "Do you think he'll learn anything from this?" Liam asked, putting his arm around his wife. Elena was quiet for a moment, watching the distant traffic move like blood cells through the arteries of the city. "I don't know," she admitted. "Some people are so invested in their own narratives that they'll find a way to repaint themselves as the victim, no matter what. But we didn't do this for him." "Who did we do it for?" "We did it for the next person he was about to insult," Elena said. "We did it for George in the lobby, and for Mr. Henderson at the park, and for every other person he would have tried to make feel small to make himself feel big. We did it to show that character is not a soft skill, it's a foundational asset, and without it, everything else, no matter how impressive it looks, will eventually collapse." She leaned her head on his shoulder. The anger was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of rightness, of a world set back into its proper alignment. The architect had not just designed a demolition, she had cleared the ground for something better to be built in its place. The poetic justice was complete, not as a vindictive triumph, but as a necessary rebalancing of the scales. It was, in its own way, a beautiful piece of construction. The months that followed were a time of quiet reconstruction, both literally and figuratively. At Sterling Cross, Jonathan Sterling, true to his word, implemented the new character clause with vigor. He held company-wide seminars on respect and professional ethics, using the anonymized tale of a talented but fatally flawed executive as a cautionary fable. The culture of the firm began to shift from one of aggressive, cutthroat ambition to one that valued integrity as much as profit. A year later, under new, more humble leadership, they submitted a new expansion proposal to Vance Sterling Properties. It was approved. Chloe Thorne, free from the suffocating weight of her husband's ego, thrived. She went back to school to finish the landscape design degree she had abandoned when she married Marcus. She discovered she had a talent for it, a passion for creating beautiful, serene spaces. She found a small apartment on the other side of town, and for the first time in a decade, felt like she was living her own life, not just playing a supporting role in someone else's. She was happier than she had ever been. And Marcus? His fall was as swift as his rise had been. Blacklisted in the high finance community, he was unable to find work at any comparable level. The Brioni suits were sold, the expensive apartment relinquished. He ended up taking a job as a junior analyst at a small, no-name firm, working in a drab cubicle in a soulless office park in the suburbs. He lived in a small, generic apartment, the kind he would have once driven past with a sneer. He was forced to live the very life he had so long despised. Did he learn his lesson? Perhaps. Humiliation is a powerful, if bitter, teacher. There were days he cursed the Vances, painting them as cruel puppet masters who had destroyed him for sport. But there were other days, in the quiet of his lonely apartment, when the truth of Chloe's final words would echo in his mind. "You built that." On those days, he would look in the mirror and see not a victim, but the architect of his own ruin. The process of rebuilding a soul is a slow and painful one, and for Marcus, the work had only just begun. One crisp autumn afternoon, Elena Vance was back at Meadowbrook Park. The air was cool and smelled of wood smoke and decaying leaves. The playground she had sketched in her journal months ago was now a reality. Children swarmed over the wooden structures that mimicked trees, their laughter echoing through the park. She sat on a bench, her leather-bound journal open on her lap, a peaceful smile on her face. Mr. Henderson, the elderly man she had helped at the picnic, came and sat beside her. "It's beautiful, Elena," he said, gesturing to the playground. "You have a real gift." "I had some help," she said, thinking of the community meetings and the volunteers who had helped with the final touches. "Some people build things with money and steel to show how big they are," Mr. Henderson said, his old eyes full of wisdom. "And some people build things with heart and wood to show how much they care." He looked at her. "You're the second kind. That's the kind that lasts." Elena looked at the children playing, at the simple, profound joy of this community she had chosen to be a part of. She thought of the glass towers and the corporate boardrooms, of Marcus Thorne and his desperate quest for status. He had believed a person's worth was measured by their address, their title, their suit. He had been so wrong. True worth wasn't in what you owned or where you lived. It was in what you built, what you nurtured, and the respect you gave freely to others, regardless of their station. It was in the quiet integrity that held firm when no one was watching, and the courage to demand that same integrity from others. It was the foundation upon which a meaningful life was constructed. Elena Vance, the architect, knew this better than anyone, and as she watched the children play on the structure she had dreamed into existence, she felt a sense of peace that no penthouse apartment or corporate title could ever provide. She was home. This story is a powerful reminder that dignity is not for sale, and respect is not a privilege for the few. It is a fundamental human right. The world is full of people who try to build themselves up by tearing others down. But as we've seen, a foundation of arrogance is no foundation at all. True strength is quiet, patient, and built on the solid ground of integrity. What did you think of Elena's response? Was it the perfect act of justice, or would you have done something different? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more tales of quiet heroes and satisfying vindication. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the next story.